And thank you all for joining us. Good afternoon to everyone on Eastern and Central Time. Good morning to everyone in and Pacific time zones. As Achint had said, my name's Ed Recker. I am with Sally. We're going to go through options to pay your remaining balance. And as he said, we do have a packed agenda today. So what we're going to really, before we jump into kind of those options, we want to make sure that we have a sound foundation. So we're going to go through the paying for college basics. We're going to talk about student loan options. And I acknowledge that we may have both some folks looking at undergraduate options, but also some graduate options. So we're going to cover some of the changes that have happened in the graduate funding area as well. And then we're going to talk through those how to fund the remaining balance options, as well as some tips and recommendations. So with that, we're going to touch on some of the paying for college basics. And where we really start with this is that first and foremost, we have to understand what costs are out there and really the two different types of costs. So oftentimes, and I'm gonna provide this a bit of a caveat, a bit of a pause. Folks, I can tell you from my years of experience in a financial aid office and just being on college campuses seemingly for the better part of half of my life at this point, financial aid folks tend to speak their own language. It is not their fault. It is the world they live in. The really good ones will pause and they tend to explain things relatively well. But some, candidly, and it's not necessarily their fault, it's just what they're used to. They'll use a lot of acronyms, they'll use a lot of jargon. So I would encourage you, in addition to everything that we cover here today, if you ever have any questions, if you're talking to one of those financial aid administrators and they say something you don't quite understand, do not hesitate to raise a hand and say, hold on, I don't understand what that was. They're more than happy to explain it to you. But again, to them, it's just second nature. And this is really one of those things that's second nature to them when we start talking about costs. And there are two different types of costs. There are direct costs and indirect costs. And they really are what they sound like. So direct costs are those costs assessed by the school directly to the student, and they're billed by the college or university. So typically for everyone, that includes tuition and any mandatory fees. If you're living on campus, it can and probably will include housing or food. And sometimes they'll call this room and board, although the Department of Education has said, let's make sure that folks really do understand it, housing and food. Then also, again, I had mentioned any required fees. Now, indirect costs are exactly that. They are indirect. These are costs that a student or a family, they're going to incur, but you're not going to necessarily get a bill directly from the college or university. So think from a perspective of books and supplies. Any type of equipment, if you're in an art class, or if you need a computer, or you have some laboratory equipment, those types of things, that may be included in that. Transportation to and from campus, any personal living expenses. So think of things as fundamental as just clothes, or walking around money. I always like to call it pizza and movie money, those types of things. And then if you're living off campus, this is also where housing and food can come into play. So this is part of that foundation. We want to make sure that we understand that there are direct costs and there are indirect costs. Now, another fundamental piece is what's called a net price. So net price is really, it's an equation. And I'm not going to go too deep into the math, but realistically, what net price is it is what we would call the sticker price. So we always talk about the cost of college. We talk about the cost of an education. And if you go to a college or university's website, they're usually going to have published cost to go to their institution. Now, that's the sticker price. The net price is what you'll actually pay. And that's that sticker price or the published price minus any types of what we would call gift aid. So think and when you hear gift aid, really that's exactly what it sounds like as well. It's a gift. It's free money. So think about it from the perspective of scholarships and grants. This is financial aid that you don't have to pay back. So when you take that published price minus any of that gift aid, that's going to get you your net price. One thing to keep in mind is that every school has something called a net price calculator. And this is really meant to help you better understand what your individual net price will be even before you fill out the FAFSA or you get any information from the school. But we'll also want to remember that net price calculators, and folks, I'm a sports guy. You can probably see that in my background. Net price calculators are meant to get you in the ballpark. They are meant to give you an estimate. It is based off of aggregated information from students who look like you and your profile, your financial profile, from last year. So it's not going to be your exact cost. It's not going to be your exact net price, but it's meant to give you a good idea as to what you may pay at that particular school moving forward. So that's net price. And I also already used a jargon term, which is FAFSA. That is an acronym. And boy, if you've ever had any type of interaction with financial aid folk, you know we love our acronyms. FAFSA actually comes to us from the U.S. Department of Education, and it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Now, this is a foundational and really fundamental application when we talk about financial aid. It is the primary application for nearly all types of financial aid, but especially federal aid. You cannot receive any type of federal financial aid without this application. And it's used to determine what types of federal financial aid, as well as how much federal financial aid you're eligible for. And they'll work in concert with colleges and universities on that as well. But oftentimes, colleges and universities will use the FAFSA to determine institutional aid eligibility as well. So we also know if folks have followed the news cycles over the past couple of years that trying to understand when the FAFSA opens has been a bit of a crapshoot. But I can tell you that recent legislation that is now law mandates that the FAFSA be open no later than October 1st of every year. So I've gotten this question quite a bit. When's the FAFSA opening, and are we sure? And the answer is we can say with the utmost confidence, absolutely yes, October 1st, if not sooner. So this past year, it opened actually in mid-September. So really good news. It gives us a level of predictability there. You'll also want to keep in mind that with the FAFSA and that federal aid, some financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So we always encourage folks to complete that FAFSA as soon after it opens as you can. And lastly, you can find the FAFSA, and it's actually the only place to fill out the official FAFSA at studentaid.gov. All right. So bear with me just a moment, folks. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. Excuse me there. Sorry about that. So before we move any further on really talking about student loans, let's touch on scholarships. The what, the when, and really the how. So scholarships, I've touched on this already. They are free money, and that's money that does not need to be paid back. You can start looking for scholarships at any point, really during your junior year and through your senior year. And I also want to keep help people just better remember and understand that you can continue to apply for scholarships throughout your undergraduate career as well as your graduate career. So keep that in mind. Scholarship searching for scholarships really should never end. That should never excuse me, folks. Sorry about that. Um, you'll also want to be aware of individual scholarship deadlines. So there is no real universal scholarship due date. A lot of scholarships will have their own individual, not only applications, but also deadlines. So you'll want to keep that in mind as you search for scholarships. And similarly, when we talk about how you apply, again, they have their own applications, they have their own deadlines. So make sure you're being mindful of all of those. But again, continue to search for them, continue to apply for them, because the more scholarships you get, the less money you have to pay, whether it be out of pocket or via student loans. And speaking of which, that's a really good segue to discuss our student loan options. So there are two primary federal student loan types. And I'm going to specify these as student loans. Now, there are additional loan types for parents. We're going to talk about those in just a little bit. But for right now, we're going to focus on the student loan types. And those two types are a federal direct subsidized loan and a federal direct unsubsidized loan. Now, federal direct subsidized loans are specific to undergraduate students. You have to be an undergrad student in order to be eligible for these. And you also have to have demonstrated financial need. Now, again, we're not going to go too deeply into this because this is kind of its own separate rabbit hole. But essentially, when you fill out the FAFSA, it generates a number, and that number is your student aid index number. Schools will use that in concert with what they call a COA, or a cost of attendance. And if they subtract your SAI, student aid index number, from that cost of attendance, and it's a positive number, that means that you have unmet need, or in this case, demonstrated financial need. And there's a good chance that you're eligible for a federal direct subsidized loan. If it's a negative number, you're only eligible for a federal direct unsubsidized loan. So that said, we're going to continue on the path of subsidized loans. And what makes these very desirable for students and families is that the interest is paid by the federal government while the student is enrolled at least half-time during their academic career. So at least half-time, if we're talking about credit hours, generally speaking, that's 6 credit hours or more. So as long as you're enrolled at least half-time, essentially no interest accrues on that. Easy math, you borrow $1,000, you go through your college career, you graduate, you only owe $1,000. I mean, it sounds logical, but that's how it works, and it's a really good thing for students and families. Unsubsidized loans work a little differently. These are not need based, so as long as you complete the FAFSA, you can be eligible. Which, again, this is where we talk about everybody's eligible for financial aid. If you complete the FAFSA, you will be eligible for federal direct unsubsidized loan. Payment is not required for either one of these loans while you're in school. However, unlike the subsidized loan, this loan, the unsubsidized loan, interest does accrue while you're in school. So, easy math again, you take out $1,000. That's going to accrue interest while you're in school if you don't make payments, which are not required to make payments, but if you don't make payments while you're in school. So I'll be honest, I don't know what that actual number is because it's going to depend on when you take the loan out, what the interest rate is, all those things. Again, it's a calculation, but we'll just say over a 4-year period, it might be an extra $100 in interest that accrues while you're in school. So that's why when we talk about various different types of student loans, the subsidized loan is the most desirable, unsubsidized thereafter. So we're going to dig just a little bit deeper on this. um, one of the things that folks often will, two things folks usually ask is what's the interest rate and how much can I borrow? So the interest rate is set annually every year and it kicks in on July 1st. So we're nearing that. And the interest rate for the upcoming year, so realistically, we talk about academic years. For the upcoming academic year, which would be the 26-27 academic year, that interest rate is going to be 6.52%, which, given our current interest rate environment, it's not bad. Look, it's not great, but it's also not bad. And then people will also ask, how much can I borrow? Now, the Department of Education does have hard and fast caps on how much a student can borrow, regardless of what their need is or what their desire to borrow is. So, for first year students, and we're really talking about academic standing here. So, when we say first year students, we're really talking about a freshman. So, for a freshman, it's $5,500, sophomore, $6,500, and then juniors and seniors and above, $7,500. However, once you have borrowed $31,000, you're no longer eligible. That's the maximum you can borrow for an undergraduate degree. Again, we mentioned earlier, FAFSA is required, and the FAFSA is actually the application. Excuse me. Uh, you do have a 6 month grace period. So even after you graduate or drop below halftime, you will have 6 months before any payments are required. They do offer various repayment terms as well as deferment options. And if you go into public service, you could be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Although I do always follow that up with folks, I would never take out a loan with the assumption that it's going to be forgiven. If you take out a loan, just candidly assume that you're going to have to pay it back. And then if you get it forgiven, that's awesome. That's great. But please borrow responsibly. That's one thing that we always preach. Only ever take out what you need and don't assume any type of forgiveness. Now, we've covered the undergrad portion. Let's talk a little bit about graduate loans. So, federal direct student loans are available for graduate students, and on the screen you can see it's just unsubsidized loans. And we are experiencing some changes in this starting July 1st. So, first and foremost, interest rate. Again, everybody wants to know about interest rate. It is 8.07%. So you'll notice right away it's a higher interest rate for graduate students than it is for undergraduate students. The maximum amount that a graduate student can receive, a standard graduate student can receive annually is $20,500. And the most that they can receive in graduate student loans is $100,000. Now, again, there are some specific majors, degree paths, where those caps go up. So that's a professional student. And you may have seen some of this in the press. These professional programs were actually defined in the Higher Ed Act of 1965. So I know a lot of folks like to beat this up, and they like to say, well, I've been told that, nurses or engineers or, insert in really, financial aid professionals, those aren't professionals. Well, it's all defined by the Higher Ed Act of 1965. It has nothing to do with the fact that whether or not you are an actual professional. I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that nurses aren't professionals or engineers. The Department of Ed is open to amending that list. They just needed to really get things going this year, and then they would open it up for additional discussion in the following years. But students that currently fall under that professional designation, think medical doctors, think I believe, oh my goodness, psychologists, think veterinarians, those types of things. So those folks are eligible for $50,000 a year, and then they can borrow up to $200,000. And really, we talk about some of those changes, or I had alluded to some of those changes. One of the biggest changes, and I'm gonna, some of this we've already gone through, but the big one I want to point out is the elimination of the Graduate Plus loan program. This was a supplemental loan program specifically for graduate students as of July 1st, 2026. So we're talking just over a week. That loan program will no longer be available to new borrowers. So there is what we would call a legacy or a grandfather clause where folks who have received it can continue to receive it to finish out their degree. But if you haven't borrowed up to this point, with some, and there are some exceptions to that, but realistically, if you haven't borrowed in this program previously, odds are you will not be able to borrow moving forward. So that's the big one. We've gone through some of those limits as well. And the last thing I'll hit on with this slide is that they have changed some of the repayment plans. So after July 1st, realistically, there's only going to be a couple of repayment options available, which would be the standard repayment plan as well as the income-based repayment plan called RAP. Again, it's financial aid. We got to have an acronym. That's just short for Repayment Assistance Plan. So now that we've hit on those, really this kind of the standard loan programs, we're going to dig into some of the credit-based loan options. And the first one is the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. Now, you'll notice the big, I know I just covered it, but I wanted to just touch on it again. The big bright starburst there, that Grad Plus loans are going away as of July 1st. I put it in there in large part because, again, it's a plus loan. That's for graduate students, but we're really going to focus on Parent Plus. And Parent Plus is a loan that allows the parent of a dependent undergraduate student to borrow funds to cover the remainder of what a student owes after their financial aid is applied. So interest rate, again, it's not the best. It peaked over or went over 9% this year, so 9.07%. And it also has an origination fee, which origination fees, sometimes folks have a little bit of a challenge wrapping their head around it, and I'll try to explain it relatively quickly. I like to refer to it as the cost of doing business. This is a fee that the U.S. Department of Education charges for really all federal student loans. You probably noticed, and you probably saw it on the slides previous, that there actually is one for the subsidized and unsubsidized loan. However, it's much lower. It's just over 1%. And realistically, its impact is minimum, especially given the dollar amounts we're dealing with there. So we use that $1,000 example for a subsidized or unsubsidized loan. That equates to $10 in an origination fee. The origination fee is actually withheld from the disbursement of the funds. So what that means is you've taken out of a loan for $1,000. You still have to repay $1,000, but the U.S. Department of Education only sends your school $990, and only $990 will be applied to your bill. Very similar thing with Parent Plus loans, only that fee is much larger. And I do believe I have an example, a more specific example moving forward. I'll hold off for that. But just some more requirements for the Parent Plus loan. FAFSA is required. So student does have to complete the FAFSA. The parent does also have to complete a supplemental application. It's a pretty straightforward application. So nothing too intimidating. It's also done through studentaid.gov. One thing to keep in mind is the parent is the borrower for the life of the loan. There is no federal mechanism to transfer the loan over to the student. It's always going to be the parent's responsibility. The student must be enrolled at least half time. And again, I talked about, well, I didn't. I alluded to the caps. There are caps on this as well. So you could borrow up to however much you needed. Starting July 1st, The maximum amount a parent can borrow is $20,000 annually per student, and then $65,000 for the lifetime of that student. So that's going to potentially leave some gaps there. So, and this is why we're covering all different options here. Also, keep in mind that if the parent applies and they are not eligible, this a dependent undergraduate student can receive an additional $4,000 in an unsubsidized loan. So those are federal direct parent plus loans. Private educational loans, again, a little bit different beast. These are loans funded by banks, credit unions, or really any other financial institution based on the credit of the applicant and or the cosigner. So this one's different from a plus loan in that the borrower is the student and if necessary a third-party cosigner. The FAFSA is not required. However, some schools may want the student to complete the FAFSA just to make sure that they're maximizing as much free aid as they can, which I completely understand. We're also going to deal, when we talk about these, we're going to say a lot, it's a range, it varies. And the reason being is it's going to depend on the individual lender and how they view the student and potentially the cosigner. So repayment periods can be anywhere from as low as 5 years upwards to 20 years. Oftentimes the borrower gets to determine what their repayment period is. And it does also, these do tend to also offer a variety of in-school repayment options. So you could go completely and immediately into repayment, full principal and interest payments. You could defer payment until after graduation. You could do a fixed payment lower than the typical payment. So in some cases, as low as like $25 a month. And you could also choose to just take care of the interest on it. We've talked about cosigners. They can help increase the chance of approval as well as an improved interest rate. And I had mentioned this previously that the terms and costs will vary potentially quite a bit between lenders. So when I talked about the different types of repayment plans for private lenders, they're going to vary, but this just really demonstrates how even doing a small monthly payment or an interest-only payment can pay tremendous dividends in terms of the total amount borrowed, or I'm sorry, the total amount paid back over the life of the loan. So this illustration really shows you basically the same. It shows a slightly different APR, which really would reflect the same interest rate. But in that bottom line where a family chose to make that interest payment over the course of the student's education, it's going to result in a much lower monthly payment once they graduate, as well as significant savings in terms of total amount paid back. So again, just a quick illustration as to why, potentially if you can swing even some type of payment while you're in school, it really does have positive downstream impacts in terms of your total amount paid. Now, this is just kind of a quick overview. We've talked a lot about Parent Plus. We've talked a lot about private loans. We've talked a lot about the other federal loan options. These are some of the things that you should consider when shopping for educational loans. And I put shopping in there very intentionally because we do want people to be consumers when it comes to this. We would encourage folks to apply to multiple lenders. One of the common misconceptions is that, if I apply to multiple lenders, it's going to just tank my credit score. That's not the case. If you apply to multiple lenders within a 30-day window, it only counts as one inquiry on your credit. So it really does behoove you to apply to multiple lenders, see which one's going to really give you the best deal holistically. And this is what we're talking about when we look at these 4 boxes. So first and foremost, determine how much you should borrow. So you need to consider your financial situation, and you should also probably consider your expected starting salary and what that means in terms of debt load. Um, Try to determine interest rate. Really, if you're looking at a private loan, also what type of interest rate? Is it a fixed interest rate? Oftentimes that provides a lot more stability, but it could be more expensive. Variable interest rates could be lower. However, you do incur some risk there that if we're in a rising rate environment, that your interest rate could actually increase. But the inverse could also be the case where it could decrease. You'll also want to consider what types of benefits are offered. Are there any type of interest rate reductions or rewards if you sign up for auto pay or some type of ACH, or just making a predetermined number of on-time payments? A lot of lenders, specifically private lenders, will add that incentive. And then some other features that you may want to consider and think about. What is that repayment term? Is it a shorter term or is it a longer term? What does that mean for the total amount that you pay back? Are there any fees? So we talked a little bit about origination fees with federal student loans, specifically with Parent Plus loans. I like to use round numbers. When we think about a Parent Plus loan, if if you borrow the maximum Parent Plus loan of $20,000, that origination fee at just under 4.3%, that would equal almost $830 in, or I'm sorry, $860 in funds that you would never see, but would still need to be paid back to the Department of Education. So that's a pretty substantial dollar amount that you would be looking at there. In a private loan, is a cosigner required? And can that cosigner be released? With a lot of private lenders, they do offer something that's called a cosigner release option, where upon graduation and after so many on time payments or potentially their cash equivalent, the primary borrower, so in this case, the student, can actually request to have the cosigner released, legally released from the loan so that they're no longer obligated toward it. I know when I worked in the financial aid office, that was a huge thing for numerous families. They wanted to help out their student, but they didn't want that debt to be theirs for the life of the debt. This was a huge benefit for them because then they knew they could help, but also be removed from the loan at some point in time. And then also, something no one needs to think about, but everyone needs to be aware of, are there death and disability waivers for these types of loans? For federal student loans, yes. If the student passes or becomes permanently disabled, the loans are forgiven. For the most for the most part, private lenders do the exact same thing, but you will want to just make sure that that is indeed the case. So we've talked a lot about student loans. We've hit on a lot of topics, but we're really going to look now beyond student loans and talk about, okay, what are some different ways to potentially fund that remaining balance? And one way that folks oftentimes overlook, but realistically could be a sometimes a tremendous source of cash, influx of cash, is as a family, take a step back and say, what are we paying for right now when the son or daughter are in, especially if they're a senior in high school, that won't be there next year? So think about things like private school tuition, if they're attending a private high school, travel. Are they in any type of travel sports or really, sports fees or anything like that associated? And similar with activities. Groceries. I know a lot of times folks laugh at this, but I have a growing 12-year-old and I know our grocery bill has gone up. So at some point, she's going to be eating someone else's groceries. Now, you're going to pay a meal plan for that, but odds are your grocery bill is going to drop. Similarly, utilities. We all like to laugh about our teenagers taking those half-hour showers. So your water bill may reduce, or your electricity or gas bill may reduce. And then other costs, like I always laugh about being the dad taxi. What does that actually mean? How much less am I going to be driving? How much less does that mean is going into my fuel tank? So think about those. And in concert with that, think about a tuition payment plan. So schools will often allow students and families to break up any remaining balance through a tuition payment plan. Now, this isn't necessarily a line of credit. This is just them saying, okay, we're going to calculate an estimated amount due, not only for the semester, although they could do a semester, but a lot of times for the entire academic year. And they allow the family to pay that over a 9 or a 10-month period. So that's really what a tuition payment plan is. They may have potentially a processing fee or a small interest fee on that. And just like anything else, if you sign up for this and you make a late payment, there may be a late payment charge there. Some other options would be a 401k plan. Now, I should probably say, before we go into any of these, I am a certified financial aid administrator. I am not a financial advisor. So these are things that if you're looking at doing any of these, especially when it involves investments, I would strongly, strongly encourage you to consult a tax advisor, and or if you work with someone with your investments, please do so. What we're going to do is we're just really going to go over some of the pros and cons. There is no one size fits all, and that's why we're touching on all of these. So in the case of 401k plans, some of those pros are there really is no credit check or application, and those funds are easy to access. So what I'm talking about is really drawing off of your 401k to help pay for college. The cons are they may have an early withdrawal penalty. There could be tax implications, and there's also loss of future growth. So if the money isn't in your 401k plan, you can't receive the benefits of that interest or that dividend income. So keep that in mind as well. Similarly, long-term investments. You could pull these out of any types of stocks or bonds, mutual funds, anything like that. Again, no credit check, and it's pretty easily accessible. But again, some of those cons. This could be supplemental or even primary retirement funding income. So you really want to weigh that. If it's not in there, the money can't grow. So again, think of it at that point. And also it could be sold at a loss. So depending on what you bought it at and what you sell it at, you could actually be in the hole. You could actually suffer a loss even before you start on that. So keep that in mind. Again, I encourage you to talk to your investment banker, talk to a tax professional if you're considering these. Home equity line of credit, sometimes called a HELOC. Again, one of the biggest pros is access. A lot of times, especially if you already have this set up, it's a line of credit and you just draw off of it. Otherwise, it's a relatively quick and easy application process. Some of the cons are if you plan on, or if for some reason you sell your house, that's money you borrowed against your house. So you'll have to pay it back. And you may actually need it in the future for something else. And again, because if you don't have it set up already, closing costs may and likely will apply to this. The last one we're going to go over is credit cards. And this one, the biggest pro is that it's super easy and it's super fast. It is as simple as a lot of times you can just do it online with the college or university. However, you are going to run into things like processing fees. Colleges and universities will likely assess you a processing fee to really try to offset that vendor fee that they have to pay. You're going to potentially run into card limits. What's your credit limit on your credit card? Are you going to hit that ceiling? And because they compound interest monthly, this can be the most expensive, excuse me, if you're not paying it off at the end of the month. So keep that in mind. All right, as we close out here, some of our tips and recommendations. And realistically, folks, the easiest thing to do, and I say easy, I apologize for that. Probably the most impactful, I should put it that way, is have a checklist. And realistically, what that is really kind of go through a lot of what we've talked about. And Achin had mentioned that this will be available. We are recording this session, so you can revisit this. But really, part of that is make a plan for who will pay. And what that ultimately means is have the conversation, have that kitchen table conversation. Who's responsible for what? How are we going to do this? How are we going to break it up to make sure that we are, really, really making sure we're checking all those boxes as to how we're funding this and who's responsible for what. I would also strongly encourage you to do your research. Use the free tools that are out there. They are plentiful, and keep learning about your options. There's just so much information out there right now. Hopefully this webinar was part of it, but I encourage you, do your research, start early, especially when it comes to various funding options, because there are options out there and there is no one size fits all. So it's going to be really taking a step back, making that plan, and then doing the research to assess what options are available and what's best for you. Also, determine if a combination of funding sources will work for you and what you'll use. You could very easily and very feasibly use student loans, a payment plan, and potentially a Parent Plus loan and or a private loan. It doesn't have to all come from one bucket. And a lot of times it doesn't. So take a look at that. Again, assess your situation and see what works best for you. And then lastly, get the help you need. If you have questions, there are resources out there, and I'm talking human capital. So school counselors are fantastic when it comes to scholarships. The financial aid office will absolutely help walk you through any type of funding questions you may have. And admissions offices may also help you if you have something like a financial aid appeal or if there are institutional scholarships or funding options available. So, those are the things that we would really strongly recommend when we talk about next steps, tips, and how to really formulate a good, solid plan when it comes to paying for college. And if with that, excuse me, that really does end the formal portion of the presentation. And I know Ryan and Achint have been behind the scenes, I believe, with questions and answers. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. I'm going to take a look here and see what we've got in the chat. And if you'll excuse me one moment, I'm going to put myself on mute and jump off camera for just a moment.
Yes, and I went through some of these questions. I tried to handle some of the private credit student loans, but I was going to kind of defer to you on some of the other more federally based loan program questions. But if you want to filter through some of these questions, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. Let's take a look at this. All right, so let's see here. Loan amounts for undergraduates. How do advanced classes affect eligibility? For example, if a student takes enough concurrent classes in high school that they may not enter college as a freshman by hours. That's a great question. So I reside in Ohio, and we call it College Credit Plus. A lot of folks early college or to your point, concurrent enrollment. When you fill out the FAFSA, what I would strongly encourage you to do is just put that you're a first time student. And the reason being is unless the student is attending the school in which they are actually receiving the credit, they have to actually, they being the student, has to have that transcript from the school in which they got the credit sent to the school they'll be attending. What I'm getting at is there's a really a credit evaluation process involved in that. It will ultimately catch up, and what I mean by that is ultimately those credits will get reviewed, they will get transcripted, but and the financial aid office will also pick up on that. So the best thing to do is when you fill out your FAFSA, just put that you're first time student, but then as a potentially as a fast follow, email the financial aid office, email the admissions office, and say, hey, I've got credits coming in from my dual enrollment classes. So that way they know once they're transcripted, then they can bump you up to that next level. So that's a great question. Um, Next question is, what would make a parent ineligible for the Parent Plus loan? So another great question. Parent Plus loans are actually, instead of looking, when we think about private credit, they're looking at positive credit and an ability to repay. Whereas with Parent Plus loans, they're actually looking for a lack of adverse credit. I'm going to try to go off of memory here, folks. So if you are less than 90 days delinquent on a total of, it's approximately $2,100. And in addition to that, have not filed bankruptcy, have a tax lien, wage garnishment, oh my goodness, lien or foreclosure, those types of things, you'll be approved. So that one is really looking for a lack of negative credit. And we can absolutely get you a list of those criteria as well. We do have those. So, next question: how hard is it for a student to complete the FAFSA without parent input? So it really, so this is one of those. I'll actually, if it's okay, I'm gonna follow up offline with this, just because it's you'll also hear this from a lot of financial aid folks. It depends. I know that's maddening to a lot of folks, but the reality of it financial aid is a lot of gray and it's a lot of nuance, and there are seemingly exceptions to exceptions. So I will be happy to answer this one offline, whether it be email or even a phone call, because the situation may be that depending on what that situation is, the parent doesn't need to submit their information so at all. But again, it kind of depends. So let's see here. With a graduate loan, how do you request the maximum? Oh, and it looks like Ryan already answered that one. Thank you, sir.
I did for
Let's
the
see.
private credit student loan.
Yes. Okay.
The school dictates the final loan amount, but you can request the max.
Correct. Yes. Yep. All right. Okay. If a parent pays off the Parent Plus loan, is that considered to be a gift to the student under the federal gift tax law? So the answer to that is no, because it's actually a parent loan. So it's never actually considered a gift because it's not in the student's name. It is a parent loan in the parent's name. So yeah, good question though. Good question. So are the federal parent loans also forgiven if the student dies or becomes disabled? So the answer to that is yes. Yes. Now, what counts as disability? So this is, again, this one's a little gray, a little squishy, but the reality of it is that a physician has to document and attest that the student is totally and permanently disabled. Now, that's ultimately at the physician's discretion, but it's something that needs to be certified by a licensed physician. All right. Can you talk about 529s and what the pros and cons are of planning and putting money into a 529? All right. So 529s, for those that aren't familiar with 529s, these are essentially college savings accounts. They are investment accounts. I have one for my daughter. So I know I know a fair amount, or some at least, about them. Some of the pros is that they are investment accounts, and so you can definitely reap the benefits of putting away money for 529s in 529s, and it grows basically tax free as long as it's used towards an educational expense. I think some of the cons are that you can potentially overfund it. However, there have been some loosening on that where you can actually use some 529 funds to pay off any student loan debt, as well as I believe there's recent legislation where you can roll it over into a Roth IRA in the name of the student. So I think that's the biggest con is just the fear of overfunding it. But again, there are some release valves on that help make that less painful. And the reality of it is that if you do truly overfund it and you've exhausted all other things, you can still potentially pull money out of it. You'll just be taxed on any interest income or gains income that you'll have there. So it's not necessarily that you lose it. It's just you'll have to pay taxes on it. All right. Let's see here. Ryan took care of that one. Yep, we talked about Parent Plus loan if the student if something happens to the student. All right. Let's see here. Okay, so to be clear, the new professional loan program limits no longer have the punitive loan origination fee that the Grad Plus loans had in the past. So it still has an origination fee, but if we're talking specifically about the federal direct unsubsidized loan for graduate and professional students, that is just the one. It's like 1.057%. So it isn't that elevated, almost 4.3%. So it still has an origination fee. It's just not nearly to that level. So, all right. Um, all right. I have students who are citizens, but parents are not. So, so when we talk about filling out the FAFSA, and this is where I think we need to be specific. So when we fill out the FAFSA, a student, if as long as the student is the citizen, a non-citizen parent can still complete the FAFSA. They can still provide their information. So that can still happen. Where potential barriers come into play is a non-citizen parent would not be eligible for the Parent Plus loan, and private credit would still be treated as private credit there. All right, let's see here. Uh, is there a way to indicate on the FAFSA that current household income is substantially lower than the 2025 tax year? So that's a great question. There is no way to identify it on the FAFSA. However, this is where I would encourage you as really a fast follow with the financial aid office or offices. Schools are required to have what's called a special circumstances application. And this is the absolute definition of a special circumstance where the income has greatly or reduced or greatly reduced. Each school will have probably a slightly different process on that, but all schools are required to have a process, which is usually an application as well as some supporting documentation. So in that case, I would reach out to the financial aid office. They'll be able to, or even the admissions office, and they should be able to walk you through that process. All right. Let's see here. Does saving more in 529 mean colleges give students less in scholarships? What should be the target to save in terms of 529 percentage? All right. So I'm going to start with the second one, which is that's really going to depend on you and your situation. What schools are you looking at? How much do those schools cost? And what percentage are you looking to fund? This is where doing the research, doing some of that net price, looking at the net price calculators, really seeing what it's potentially going to cost. That should help inform you as to what percentage of that really that sticker price you're going to want to save for. Now, the first question, does saving more in a 529 mean colleges give less in terms of scholarship? The short answer is no, not really. Where it potentially comes into play is that with 529 plans, they do have to be listed as an asset on the FAFSA. Now, this is not a dollar for dollar swap. It's actually it's quite a bit lower. Gosh, I my knowing the federal formula off the top of my head, uh, yeah, I don't know it off the top of my head with 100% confidence, but I believe it takes a relatively small percentage of your assets into consideration. 11% is what's popping in my mind. Again, I can look that one up, but it realistically it should not be a deterrent in terms of saving for 529. It would only impact need-based aid. It should not impact any type of academic aid whatsoever. So, all right, let's see here. And I think that was actually our last formal question. Boy, so y'all are great. Like, look at this. We're at two to the top of the hour.
Yes.
I know a lot of people budgeted an hour, so I feel like we're right on track. So, any other last minute questions or comments?